and welcome to this roundtable focusing on cybersecurity. As 8% of the UK's GDP is now generated online and the cloud is fast becoming the norm, we're well aware that we need to pay attention to our cybersecurity. But with many global brands last year falling victim to cybercrime, how can we make sure that we are paying attention to the right areas of cybersecurity for our business? Well, today we'll be discussing the nature of the cybersecurity threats out there at the moment, where businesses can go for help and advice, and what the government is doing to address this threat. I'm Angela Lamont, and I'm joined in the studio today by Chloe Smith, MP, Minister for the Political and Constitutional Reform in the Cabinet Office, Andrew Miller, MP, Chair of the Science and Technology Select Committee, Greg Day, Director of Security Strategy for Symantec, Dr. Ian Levy, one of the Technical Directors of GCHQ, Charlie McMurdy, Detective Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police Service, Matthew Fell, Director for Competitive Markets at the CBI, and Andrew Bushby, the UK Technology Director, Information Security at Oracle. So, Minister, can I begin by asking you first of all, how well prepared do you think UK Plc is at the moment with respect to cybercrime?
Well, I think actually by the fact that we're having a debate like this today, and thank you for organising it and to your viewers for being interested in this subject, that shows actually how current a topic this really is. It is clear that cyber in its various different forms is a major risk for the UK, but what's absolutely equally clear is that this is not just a problem for government, it is a shared problem between the public and private sectors. The private sector is in many ways the biggest economic victim of cybercrime, cyber espionage or IP theft. There are various ways to cut that. PwC makes estimates around quite a high number of firms, large and small, that have been subject to attacks and breaches. And equally, we can try to quantify how much that costs to the economy. So it's a really serious question. The government has put in place a national cybersecurity strategy and programme to deliver on that, the defences that we need as a country. But crucial to that strategy and programme is working in partnership with the private sector.
So if I can come to you, Matthew, from the CBI, how do you feel the private sector is responding to cybercrime at the moment? Are we doing enough?
Sure. I mean, my sense is that awareness levels of cybercrime and the sort of threat of it have risen quite significantly in recent years. I think the sort of big challenge now is, having got the awareness level up, the challenge is sort of, what do you do about it? And I think that's probably where the issue is sort of stuck around boardroom tables in Britain today. It's registered on their radar screen, but what do I do about it now as a next step? And I think that's kind of where the debate has got to for many companies.
Yes, and I think if there is any confusion, then what budgets people do have to spend on cybersecurity are not being spent. Because if I don't know where to spend my budget for my company, then it may get delayed. And surely doing nothing is what we don't want to happen. So where can companies start to go to find out where they should be looking at? Where are their risks and where should they be spending their money?
So before I answer, I almost maybe want to challenge back a little bit. I think certainly awareness of the threat has grown, but I think we still suffer a couple of different challenges here. I think there's still always that perception of, I am one of billions of people online, so whilst I hear about this, it's never going to happen to me. So I think there is still a bit of a denial of, there's big scary numbers that happen to big global companies, but I'm just one of an everyday organisation, or even just a home user of the internet. I think the other big challenge is, unlike kind of the physical crimes where there is a very visible impact, somebody smashed my door in, they took the safe from the building, it's very transparent. So I think the other challenge, both for those solving the problem and really for the business, is, how do I put my hands around this? How do I quantify it? Because we still see too often it may be 3 or 4 years before they even realise that the problem happened. And then, because often they just took a copy of something I had, it's very hard for them to actually say, this is the level of impact that it had on my organisation. And I think that's then where businesses struggle to say, if we take a risk-reward view, if I can't quantify the level of impact, how do I quantify how much time, money and effort I spend to try and manage, if not mitigate, the problem?
I think following up on that, there's two real challenges here. One is the threat. Everybody talks about the threat as though it's, I call them omnipotent cyber ninjas. Everybody's expecting this group of people who can do anything to a computer, and it's just not like that. They've got different groups trying to do different things for different reasons with different capabilities. So you've got the hacktivists, the anonymous of the world, who are trying to damage brand for political reasons. You've got the cyber criminals who are trying to make money. And then the thing we're concerned about the most is the nation states attacking businesses and stealing intellectual property. As Greg says, though, the biggest challenge for business is making a business case for investment, because the impact, the action and the impact are so far dissociated that the standard return on investment models don't drive you to do the right thing. That's why we want boards to take an active view on this. They need to actively manage this risk, just as they actively manage financial risk or HR risk or legal risk. Because if you don't do that, you're going to, in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, your competitor's going to patent your next big thing.
And I think where sort of Greg and Ian make a really good point, Angela, is that of all the sort of numbers that are out there in this, I think there's something that sort of 2/3 of companies have said it'll take sort of direct action either on them or a direct rival before they'll really sort of kick into gear and do something about it. So I think that just shows exactly that issue about quantifying the risk and thinking how do I sort of really embed that in the organisation as sort of genuine risk management in the way that you would model and manage many other risks that's facing the business.
There is no doubt that there is an increasing recognition by both business and government that, if I can for once paraphrase David Cameron, we're all in this together, and that sharing is hugely important, and that's an initiative that is genuinely welcome. That I still think there's some huge missing parts. When I get that attempt at identity theft from somebody pretending to be HMRC, for example, when I report it to HMRC, I get no feedback. And that's something, Chloe, that your department can lean on HMRC. Similarly, point to Charlie, is that I'm dealing with a case at the moment where 2 police forces were involved and they wouldn't accept that identity theft was a crime. It is a crime. It has potentially incredibly serious consequences. And we have got tools at our disposal that we can use to strengthen the base. Chloe and I yesterday were talking about an IT competition for primary schools that I've been running for some years, and that's being focused entirely around teaching primary school children about cyber security issues. You've got to start at that age, otherwise A, the next generation aren't going to be prepared to be in the workplaces of the businesses that the CBI represent, and B, as citizens they will be vulnerable. So there are more things that we can do. And from a technology point of view, there's some exciting new technologies coming on stream. For example, a company in my area is trialling with the card companies a home-based chip and pin device to bring in the kind of security that we associate with the hole in the wall machine to home, and thus take some of the risk away. So there's an awful lot that can be done. Therefore, we shouldn't regard ourselves as being totally on the back foot and we're losing this battle. It's a huge battle, but there are things that we can do to strengthen the citizen and the country's.
You know, it's interesting you talk about the things that are being done, and you mentioned children there, because today is the Global Stay Safe Online Day for children. Lots of schools are doing work and are making a big thing about it to educate the children. I'm not aware of any Stay Safe Online for Business days in the UK this year. Perhaps we do need to all mark a date in our calendar when we really sit down and have a good look at our businesses, how we may be vulnerable to what kind of cybercrime, and start to pin that down so our businesses can thrive online.
I think we need to think though a bit, because you said, where do people get information? And I think we need to think a little bit more about what information would really be useful for today. I think there is a myriad of information that kind of defines kind of the glossary of what different things are. And there's a lot of numbers out there of different incidents going on. But actually where I think we fall down is more on the flip side, which is, what are the best practices actually that I should follow what really the things that are happening today. And I think for me there's a couple of things that we can really do here. The first rudimentary change is we have to accept that incidents will happen. And I think in the security industry we've always had this kind of mantra of anything that got through is a failure, and the same doesn't happen in the physical world, so why should it be online? Once we can start to accept that, then I think the next thing is we need to recognize the scope is always changing. I think, cyber is a great example. Cyber has been around for, 10, 15 years. Suddenly this word has now become kind of the topic of the year. So what's really changed? Well, cyber, the term's around, but kind of some of the detail of the what's really happening has changed. And I think once we start to accept, we need to look at the change. The final part of that is what do we want to share? So, there's a great government initiative that's been running, which is all about information sharing and exchange, that says we will never share the detail of the impact it had to us. That's kind of our personal business information. But what we should be able to share is the attributes of these things that we're seeing. Have you seen something like this? I've seen something like this. And if you've seen something like that, these are the things we should be doing to mitigate it. So unfortunately, we see organised crime very much collaborating together. And I think today that gives them an edge. And we have to get over this hurdle of accepting that breaches do happen so we can better collaborate, so we then get back on that level footing.
One of the interesting things I see, though, is that we see that people accept there's a risk now. They're taking the risk approach, but too often they're solving that risk by signing a piece of paper to say they're going to accept that risk rather than do anything. If you look at the impact to Sony, unfortunately, the first brand who's going to get named in this environment all the time. We've just seen them fined £250,000 in the UK. Whether that ends up being enforced is a different question. But the real cost to Sony is, somewhere in the region of 1.5 billion. If you read Forbes magazines, they believe in time it could cost them 24 billion. Now that's a big impact to the company. And yet, often in organisations of that size, the choice not to do something is signed off by a lower level manager or a lower level member of staff who decides this isn't a risk that we want to take on. We'll sign a piece of paper. That doesn't cost us anything right now, but it might cost us in time, later on. And when we look at the problems with the number of records that have been stolen over the last 6 years, that's 1 billion records is the estimate. They're coming from things like database servers, and people don't think about protecting that core data. They think about that, that's a risk we're not going to worry about, that's a low-level risk. But that's exactly where this data's come from Sony.
And yet there was another large brand last year who had a breach, and they were found to be storing a database with no encryption whatsoever. Yeah. So it is interesting. Charlie, I wanted to ask you, in fact, are you finding that businesses are still reluctant to talk about breaches in security? Is this one of the things that's holding us back from getting enough information to really pool our resources and work together to fight it?
I think it comes back to points that have already been made, and particularly Andrew's point about this awareness. A lot of companies and individuals, they always think it's going to happen to somebody else. A lot of business and individuals, they don't recognise when they have been compromised. Particularly individuals, they may not know that their accounts, their systems are being compromised, and unfortunately the same applies to business. Once they are aware that something's gone wrong, and something will go wrong with cyber, it's hitting across the piece now, then it's a case of what do we actually do about this? Can we keep it under wraps? There has to be a mood change to actually share the fact of what has happened, share that intelligence, let your neighbour know how that attack took place so we can actually provide a better, more concerted response for future attacks. Mitigation, you can mitigate day in, day out, but that doesn't address the problem. As Greg's mentioned, there is now a big piece of work with the National Cyber Security Programme around bringing industry sectors together to share intelligence, to share the nature of the threats, what's causing them harm, without shouting up and damaging their brand and reputation. My unit, the Police Central E-Crime Unit, deals with incidents, cyber attacks that potentially are sort of the higher national level impact, but we are seeing more and more industry, business, particularly the financial sector, coming to us with intelligence around attacks that have taken place. So I think that sharing is actually developing, those trusted relationships, the understanding that we have to share this intelligence to protect ourselves in the future. So I think things are improving.
We still have significant layers within key businesses where the degree of training is not strong enough, and the lessons that the MOD learnt following the lost laptop that when Sir Edmund Burton reported on that, it was clear there was a massive training gap inside the Ministry of Defence. We had this young man who we had trusted and trained to be in charge of taking people into war zones and dealing with incredibly high risk issues, but nobody had trained him about cyber security issues, and it's not that obvious when you're in a crazy busy world, and that equally applies in many of our key businesses. So this the awareness has got to be driven down from the boardroom and come up through the education.
It's got to be mainstreamed, and that's, there are umpteen different programmes around mainstreaming within all the different government sectors. So for law enforcement, we have programmes around mainstreaming awareness within our police service to actually respond to crime, to share the information with the public. The government advice that's recently been published around what you should be looking to do to ensure that you stay safe and you protect. Cyber is physical. There we go. There's a copy of it. It's a really user-friendly jigsaw map. You need to have all the component parts of that jigsaw in place, and you need to understand it. If you equate it, it's like baking a cake. You can have the book, that's the book, but you need to practice it. You need to read the book. You need to have people who hone their skills and can deliver and understand all those pieces of the jigsaw.
And it really is a brief and readable guide, 10 Steps to Cybersecurity, published by CESG, Ian?
GCHQ, BIS and Cabinet Office.
Yes, so it's well worth having a look at.
I think there's a really important point here that brings together some of the themes we've just been discussing, and I think it's around incentives and skills. So one of the key messages here is that it is in businesses' own interests to act on this. So Matthew, you just posed the challenge that, if 3/4 of businesses thought that they were going to have this risk, then they'd make a business case for it.
Yeah.
3/4 of these businesses have already had cyber breaches, says PwC's research. So we're there again in this realm of incentives. There's every motive to do something about this. And I think then we need to take that debate into how do we go with the grain of what's in people's interests here. It is so clearly in both the public sector's and private sector's interests, both in terms of traditionally defending the UK and helping business do better in cyberspace, helping the UK economy grow through this being a sector that we can actually really sell to the rest of the world in. Whole range of interests and incentives. To underpin all that, though, we do need good skills, and this is something that the National Cybersecurity Programme is majoring on. We need to start them young, as it were, and that has to mean a call to industry to consider taking on apprenticeships. That's something I'd like industry to consider perhaps out of this debate. But it's also about making sure that training at universities is right. It's about focusing on the research centres we have in the UK. All of these things are part of the government programme on this, and they're vital because skills are what underpin getting the incentives right throughout everyone who needs to be concerned.
Just to firm up those figures you mentioned, Chloe, the PwC report does show that in the last year, 93% of large corporations and 76% of small businesses did experience a cybersecurity breach in the last year, costing them, for the smaller companies, £15,000 to £30,000 per breach, and for the larger companies, between £110,000 and £250,000 per breach. So when you say, we'll do something about it when it happens to us or a close neighbour of ours, I think it already has.
I think that's exactly it, and I do think there's a couple of points I wanted to come back on. First, I think back to this whole issue of sort of reporting. I think it's really important that sort of we get the sort of commercial incentives right around that in a sense, because if you've got this sort of shared and trusted space where people are able to have that sort of sharing about what actually happens to me, how can we all get on the front foot and help to address it, that's clearly got to be the right approach. So I think that is really important to get that sort of trusted space aligned with the right commercial incentives for firms. And then Andrew, you touched on a really important issue, I think, around training, which sort of points to the whole sort of approach and philosophy, which is the right way of approaching this, I think, because it seems to me there's still this sort of mindset almost that we can prevent and control, but actually we know it's sort of a present and endemic risk right now. So that points to the fact that you need to sort of mitigate it rather than just think you can sort of absolutely stop it at the door sort of style approach. And that really then just points to me it's all about people, culture and behaviours as much as it is about technology. And I think that is a really important thing. People think too much that this can be purely a technology-driven solution.
So there's I think a key to this though, which is relevance. And to give an example, 4 or 5 years ago, we ran a survey across UK employees and said, who is responsible, who's accountable for IT security? And 98% came back saying the IT security department. So there's this kind of little layer in the middle of the cake that had all of the problem. And I think the first bit is going up to the board that says, we have to help translate, you know, a botnet has done something blah, 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 which is literally blah, 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 into these are your business processes that are dependent on IT. If you lose these processes, what does it cost you? And you know, we saw in our survey we ran this year, typically across Europe, information is 40% of the value of an organization. And then I think you almost come down to kind of accountability at the other end of the scale that says, I'm an employee within this organization. If I'm handling somebody else's data, I should treat it like my own. So, you know, basic things from password management to just locking my system when I'm not there, all those things that said, if I gave my information to somebody else, how would I want them to treat my information? I need to do the same. And I think what we've really seen in the last year is the smarter organizations starting to try and make it relevant to employees. How do you help yourself at home? How would you want, you know, somebody else to treat your data? And then here's the simple steps that you need to take. And I think, you know, this 10-step guide is brilliant. One of the things we see is very often companies get lost on the new and cool. Here's the new threat, and here's the great new technology. And what we do very badly is just the rudimentary basics. And we could stop 70, 80, 90% of the problems if we just did the basics much better.
But Greg, there's got to be an incentive to do that, right? And the remediation numbers you've just quoted, I have no idea where they come from, but I don't believe them, right? This isn't about how much it costs me to clean up an incident. It's about what is the existential threat to the UK economy. Right? The UK is an information economy. If some nation state has nicked all of our information, how do you do something new? Because they've got it all. And that's what we are talking about. Let's be really, really clear here. We are not talking about little attacks on various bits of industry. We are talking about a sustained endemic attack against the UK. And as long as we keep talking about, you know, oh, it's 10 grand here or it's 50 grand there, businesses can absorb that. I know it's painful, but they can absorb that. There's a risk calculus you can make. When you say in 4 years you're not going to exist because another company has all your research, has all your patents, and is going to release your products a year before you do, that's the way we need to start talking about this. We have to bring it much more back to business impact, because then you get boards managing business risk at board level. It's not a technology problem.
I think it's really important. I mean, the great thing about the 10 steps in the paper is it gives you practical examples of what you can do in different areas. One of the problems we get in the cyber world is people get fixated by the perimeter, you know, the firewall, the outside world. We've got to protect against the outside world. We don't do that with burglaries. We know that someone is going to break in and they're going to steal our valuable information or our valuable assets in the company. So we protect those. You know, we don't necessarily have our most valuable things at home. We protect them somewhere else. We look after them. So we have to think like that as well. We've seen it in supermarkets. We no longer say go to a supermarket. You know, not everything is protected, but the valuable items in the supermarket, if you walk out without buying them, you'll get the buzzer go off. We need to think about the same thing, and the great thing about the paper is it talks to you about thinking about your IPR, think about your PII information, your key assets, how you're going to protect those, how you're going to ring-fence those on the inside, because they will break in. We've all acknowledged that as we go through. How can we stop them getting so far in the organisation? How can we stop them getting to the most safe, the most important assets of the company? I think that's where we need to start. So it's not just about the perimeter, about where we can look after the most important assets.
I think that also just points to a really interesting thought around supply chains through companies as well, because most often today companies don't sort of work in individual, this is my company, and then sort of have a transactional relationship with us. It's actually genuinely about collaboration through the supply chain. and yet we know, just to sort of pick on exactly the point you're making, the point of entry is often the weakest link in the chain, essentially. That's got to make sense if you're sort of coming at it with that mindset, and that most often sits elsewhere in the supply chain, not just within your own bit of it.
The problem is we still see, and business and individuals still see cyber as that thing over there in the corner. It's not woven into, and we say within law enforcement, cyber is an integral part of everything that we deal with. And it is within business. It's very difficult to look at any business aspect and ignore the ICT component of that. So, you know, all this security and things, I think there still is a mindset, and when we deal with businesses, that they come under attack, or we all speak to audiences here around cyber. I don't think I've ever seen anybody from HR in that audience. It's always, you know, it's those geeks that deal with the cyber bit. It's not. It's everybody in the organisation has to have a tiered response understanding around that ICT component.
Now, it's interesting that you bring into this, all of you have said that it's everyone's, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Andrew has already pointed up the fact, and the Minister, that there's a lot of education going on for the younger ones who are still at school now to really make them aware both for their own personal safety and security, and that will also filter through to their future employers' security and safety. Possibly the older staff I deal with, the more mature ones, I would say, are more frightened of putting their information online in the first place. So do we have a generational thing here? Is it the Facebook generation who are used to sharing everything with everyone, who are possibly the ones that most badly need re-educating when it comes to work, and that you can't share everything with everyone, and we really do have to pull that in tightly, whether it's our own personal details, whether it's our business details, particularly if it's anything we're working on for work at home, for example. Would you say that's the case?
I think there's a clear need here for segmentation. So to use another concept that will be very familiar to any business that does any marketing, you need to know who you're dealing with and what they respond to. And that is indeed, in this case, a full spectrum. You know, you can cut that across age, you can cut it across experience, you can cut it across the type of work people have done, you can cut it across the kind of devices people own at home, as you rightly say. It is absolutely the case that there is, at either end certainly of one of those spectrums, there is a younger generation that does need to be guided in how to be safer online, and that's part of the point of today being a safer online day. And very much there, actually, you're going not only into economic crime, but also into some of the other extremely difficult areas that Charlie will know all about of law enforcement. But it is also the case that any segmentation work needs to accommodate people who might want to pick up further skills later in life. And just going back to the skills challenge of this, actually, there should be total fungibility in a way of skills between the public and the private sector. Anybody who wants to keep their own organisation secure and be part of that, and for that to be prosperous, whether that's UK Plc or a smaller PLC, as it were, you know, those skills are equally valid and equally valuable. So it is down actually to, in part, to government to help coordinate and promote skills across that spectrum. But once more, it is about doing that in partnership. You have to do this in partnership, public, private, academia, everybody.
I don't think you can simply segment the Facebook generation off from people of my age. It's a very complex mix. The common factor is that the people who are safest are the people who've had some training and had some awareness-raising activity that they've been involved in. Sometimes that's because they've been a victim and they say they're not allowed to happen again, but often it's because the awareness has been raised. And I did some work through the Internet Governance Forum with some children from the UK and from other countries, and their criticism of Facebook was not that they could share in the way they share, because they love doing it, but nobody had opened their eyes to the things that they shouldn't do before the tool was made available to them.
And that's deciding about sort of what information is really important to you, sort of thing. What am I happy to share and disclose? What do I want to keep protecting
Which is why
myself?
again we need to go with the grain. You know, that's the way in which I use segmentation. We need to identify what incentives work for different groups and work together to apply those and make those.
Well, it's interesting. We've done some research into this, and I think, as much as we try not to generalise, our experience is generally the more mature people going on social networks are the skeptics that say, I've learned life experiences in different environments that make me naturally cautious to this. Then, we have kind of the IT generation of today that are just users of this technology, but we've not actually had the time and experience yet to learn the impact of that. And I think they will probably be, if anything, the group that suffers. And the generation behind that now is just starting to come online will actually learn from those mistakes and have a more balanced view of the problem. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I think most people still grapple to get their head around is, if I make mistakes in the physical world, if I hand over some information, generally people either forget or they lose the physical copies. Electronic information truly is for life, and the hardest bit is once you've put it out there and it starts to be cached and duplicated around, it becomes very, very hard to undo and remove that information.
But that's the wrong way to talk about it, because if you talk about it like that, you're trying to scare the Facebook generation into not putting anything out there, and that's just not what they're going to do. You've got to be much more about bringing analogues to people. So the phishing attacks. So the physical analogue of a phishing attack is me coming knocking on your front door, saying, hi, I'm from your bank. Can I have a copy of your credit card and your PIN number, please? And can you sign this bit of paper? If I did that, you're going to tell me where to go, aren't you?
But I don't think we need to scare people. But I think equally, that we need to help them be cognizant of. My simplest guidance to anyone online is, any information you post online, consider public domain.
But this goes back to all of the constituents we've talked about, be it people, be it businesses, whatever. It's all down to what we just said about information value. Know the value of the information you care about. Know which bits are important to you and protect them appropriately. And that's whether it's business, whether it's people, it doesn't matter. That's the kind of knowledge we need to get across to people to help them do that.
We're obviously not force-feeding people the right prevention, the right awareness. As you say, these phishing emails, we all know there's plethoras of them out there. We're dealing with umpteen live investigations, operations, day in, day out, where thousands of people are still handing over their private details online because they think they've won the lottery, or the bank's asking for give us your financial identity again. So why people will not pay attention to the best prevention advice unless there's some form of liability accountability that they need to do that, or they fall foul of one of those scams. And it's always that, close the door after the horse has bolted. That's when they'll go and look at the really good advice and get safe online advice.
And it's interesting that you used the word force feeding, because of course the irony is that you are all in agreement that training is needed here for each individual within an organisation to understand their own responsibility. And yet perhaps it's the sectors who feel they are very IT savvy and don't need the training who are possibly needing the training most at the moment.
Well, I think it more that comes back to that, IT security is somebody else's problem perception that is, number one, it's never going to happen to me, or if I'm doing it at work, there's somebody that keeps me safe. So I think it comes back to I have to be responsible for myself. And we are in every other facet of our lives. So I'm not sure how we got to this point of just kind of this, I can offshore, I can put in the cloud my security responsibilities.
I think there's quite a strong sort of parallel there from a sort of business perspective, almost with where sort of the health and safety debate was sort of 20 years ago, or thereabouts, where it was seen as a sort of thing that you had to sort of do or comply with, and it was someone's job to do that. And I think now, in the vast majority of businesses right around the country, health and safety is seen as something that you do because it's good for you as a business. Your workforce is your most valuable asset, and you want them at work. I think it's almost sort of getting that culture and mindset in the way that we have done very successfully on health and safety. This is the sort of
and I
21st
think
century equivalent of that almost.
We're getting there, because if we go back 10 years ago, IT was something that was kind of a nice to have, but wasn't, if I lost my mobile phone or my computer crashed, I could still carry on. Today now, when people lose their smartphone, suddenly, there's so much of their life is intertwined into it. So I think, that, and it's the same in business and in personal life, that our dependencies are growing, that now we're kind of starting to see that hygiene as a more important factor.
But I think the health and safety analogy is really important because it brings Charlie's point of personal impact into it. So yeah, when I go to work, they tell me not to run with scissors. If I run with scissors and hurt myself, well, I was stupid. I deserved to be hurt. How do you try and bring that across into the cyber world and say, we've told you not to click the link. We've really told you not to click the link. Please don't click the link. If you click the link, what's the personal impact? Because at the moment it's nothing. Because as Greg says, the IT department takes it all away from you.
So I think that's okay for individuals, and I think we're talking a lot about education and awareness, and really we're talking about security almost in this respect like an insurance policy. We've got to make the problem big enough that they'll buy a policy, and the policy to put technology in place to enforce that. The problem is that's okay, I think, for an individual because it's your information and your assets you're risking. For a lot of these big organisations, they have not their assets. Their assets are everybody's information, everybody's assets. So if they're not being asked appropriately and told you have to do this, rather than here's a great paper that tells you how to do these things and we're going to raise awareness, we're going to do all these things. If we don't see more enforcement from the ICO, again, it becomes it's not a strong enough instrument to make them actually do everything.
I think that is absolutely right, and it goes beyond the way IT is managed in companies. One large bank sent me a document recently that invited me to give some details on it that I felt incredibly uncomfortable putting on a single sheet of paper. And I've written back to the bank saying, you have all these details, don't write to me in this manner. And now that's indicative of a very, very bad business process that will spill over into their IT management, and it makes you shudder to think about the risks associated with that. So companies ought to be looking very closely at the whole of their business processes and questioning whether they are exposing their customers.
Well, I think what comes in off
their
the back
employees with the risk.
what comes in off the back of that, actually, you opening up the idea there of actually competitiveness. You would be well within your rights as a consumer to then go with a different bank because you felt that one was so inadequate or was not giving you what you needed. What we do have, and we mustn't forget in this conversation actually, is the opportunity for growth in the UK economy through cyber. You mentioned the point that this word cyber has taken on so many different meanings or is given so many different spins and so on. That's true. Cyber, the internet, is a wonderful thing that opens up many, many opportunities. It has its dark side, which we've just gone through quite extensively. But let's not forget the opportunities. Banks and any other businesses ought to be able to say, right, I'm going to use my business processes and the IT that supports them to be as good as we can be for our customers. And then we have an exporting opportunity off the back of that, which says UK businesses actually have a really good competitive advantage in this. We are a knowledge economy. Let's get that out there and actually make some money off it, because cyber is a double-edged sword.
If there's one area that I would say that we work very, very closely with, it's obviously the financial sector and the virtual task force model that we've got in the UK. And I think, standing up for the banks here, I think that really is an opportunity. The banks have the best capability, the skill set, the knowledge, the analysis. They're the ones that are seeing the fraud, the compromised identities, the money that's flowing out of the UK, and the fast time response that we put in place to actually address that.
Now, I just want to take a little look ahead and start taking us from where we are now to where we may be next year or the year after, because there may be many people watching this debate who are about to change their cybersecurity risks and their cybersecurity profile by perhaps going to the cloud, by perhaps forming closer links with their suppliers and with their customers, by allowing their employees to bring in their own devices and use laptops from home and mobile devices while they're actually on their way to and from work. So there may be many people watching this who have a handle on their cybersecurity profile at the moment, and yet that's all about to change, and it's about to possibly become a little more tricky to manage. So what can we do about that? Where can people go for advice? Is there any points, for example, in the government reports that they can use? And how do people get a handle on the risks associated before they make those decisions?
Well, I would certainly advise this. We can flash it again once more for the camera. It's 10 steps to cybersecurity. With it goes an exec companion as well. I think it's accessible. The World Economic Forum has agreed, I think with probably everyone around this table, that it is a helpful piece of guidance. We're also looking at making it more accessible to small businesses as well. There shouldn't be, I don't think, a distinction here that a small business says, okay, this is for the big boys, because it's not. This is for everybody. There is simple advice out there, and again, for the government, this is part of making the UK a safer place to do business and helping the private sector to play its part in that, crucial part in that.
So, if I look at it at the high level, I think, I almost want to go back to Chloe's kind of two-sided sword here, and it's absolutely true that, we are certainly going through an era where we've moved from, it used to take 2 years to kind of bring some sort of IT service online, to now I can do it in 2 weeks by using a cloud service or getting an app developed. And they are all great new ways of going to market. And I think the challenge is we need to look at the kind of the business risk reward that goes with that and then take a measured balance. And I think we've come from this historical approach that kind of went, business, if you want to do this, then the first thing we need to do is to put the brakes on, stop for 6 months and let IT security go and do the due diligence and analysis, and that kills the competitive edge. So I think, there needs to be this more inclusive approach, business and IT security or whoever that department may be working together, that says, there may be risk, what's acceptable, how do we take this to market in a timely fashion where we understand the implications rather than we stop and take note. And I think, one of the interesting things for me is regulatory fines and all of the other things we often use to quantify the risk actually aren't the biggest kind of impact. It's typically brand damage or customer churn. And I think, financial services is a great example where 5 years ago, I remember my bank suddenly giving me this two-factor authentication device, and it was almost kind of snuck under the door of, we want to keep you safe, but we don't want to advertise it because then that highlights the problem. Yeah. Whereas now today, I'm suddenly seeing all these banks advertising, we offer internet banking, it's great because it's more dynamic, it reduces cost, everything else, and we're trying to make it safe. So I think, we need to tackle the problem head on rather than kind of shying away from it.
Which is hence the advantage of information sharing. So just to give it its name, you mentioned the Cyber Information Sharing Partnership, which is absolutely a place also that businesses ought to feel they can go to do that in a safe environment.
Yeah.
I think Charlie's comment about the financial services having it really good is absolutely right as well, but I think they've got it easy because I'm going to lose this amount of money if I don't tackle the fraud. It's going to cost me this amount of money to fix it. Do I fix it or not? It's a really simple calculus. I've got this information which has an intangible benefit to me somewhere down the future. How much should I spend protecting it is a very, very different thing to think about. I'd also challenge your initial assertion that businesses understand their cybersecurity risk today. So all the evidence that we in GCHQ have say that's not true, because if they did, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
So Matthew, then, can I come to you and say, what more needs to be done from the government to help UK businesses protect themselves and their business interests? And if the government are doing enough, what more can be done to help those businesses find that information?
Sure. I'm not sure actually it's I'd look to government in the first instance. I think it's actually about what the companies need to do themselves. And I would put it really back into that sort of risk management mindset issue. Sort of a couple of examples. If I'm a manufacturer and my main production line goes down, I'd guess that information hits the CEO's desk pretty rapidly. If my major customer defects to my biggest rival, that's going to hit the CEO's desk pretty rapidly as well. I think if this is a sort of proper cultural issue throughout the business, I would say this is about having it absolutely just as part of your overall approach to risk management, not a separate thing. And then I think I'd get the culture aligned to say this is a major issue. If we get an incident occurring in the instance, I think I'd measure it by response time between where does it happen in the technical department and how rapidly does it hit the CEO.
A lot of companies don't even know where their business starts and finishes. Where's their infrastructure? Where's that data being held? Who's outsourced that material? So when they come under attack and we get called in to actually assist them, it's, where's that happening? Where do those servers sit?
And some companies with very complex intellectual property, say pharmaceutical businesses, you're absolutely right. wildly different from the banking environment. That IP may be spread around, not just their complex, which might be global, but dozens of universities as well. And protecting those risks really does underline the need to have the right skills in the boardroom, because without them you won't have a strategy that manages those risks.
And that gets further complicated by the fact that majority of these hacks and majorities of these environments that have been broken into, the companies themselves don't even find out about them. It's a third party that tells them that they've been hacked. If they're a big organisation, they may be helped by people around the table. But if they're a smaller organisation, they're not. They don't find out about themselves. In the financial world, they tend to find out about it because there's fraudulent transactions that have happened. And so eventually they get told X number of fraudulent transactions through you as a data processor has happened. But most organisations don't even know what happened. So if you go back to your IPR theft from the likes of the farmers, they may never know that that information has been stolen until a competitor comes out with a product very similar, based on their research they've spent billions on, that someone else has now taken that advantage and jumped on.
That's confirmed with, we actually, conducting the arrest, and go out and grab hold of that individual that's hacked, compromised that particular business, that has been reported to law enforcement. And then when you have a look at what they're actually in possession of and you identify, there's another 20 or 30 businesses' data that's actually been compromised as well, that's never been reported, and a lot of those businesses aren't even aware that that's been compromised.
Thank you very much. That would seem a good note to end on, because although we all are aware that we have to beef up our cybersecurity, it's more than anything most important to be aware of the basics to make sure that you know whether or not there's been a breach in the first place. So thank you very much to my guests today. That's all we have time for. I hope it's not only given you food for thought and some ideas about where you might go for further help and information, but also got you to pencil your own Stay Safe in Cyberspace Day for your own organisation to make sure that those things happen. I'd just like to say thank you to my guests in the studio today, Chloe Smith, Andrew Miller, Greg Day, Dr. Ian Levy, Charlie McMurdy, Matthew Fell and Andrew Bushby. And thank you also very much to you for joining us.